Okay. Hello everyone. Hopefully my voice is loud enough and you can hear me. I wanted to record a quick episode before I sleep. And the idea arose to me when the victorious future reminded the defeated past. Or better yet, let me readjust the title. When victorious futures remind defeated pasts. Or here, I'll just say when the victorious future reminded the defeated past. Now everybody's heard both. In the subtitle, I have written transitions towards parallel livelihood. Now, I thought about what is the most valuable thing that a human being can do. One, it is advancing the outer world. Two, it is advancing the inner world. Pretty much we can live and serve the physical dimensions of the world, which is another way of saying we serve the body of humanity. Or we serve the mind of humanity. Now, physically, I don't have the resources to redesign civilization at the moment. But I thought that even if we had somehow built an advanced physical civilization, we would still need to behave in it. We would still need to function in it. The human being is such a complicated component of nature, complicated part of nature, that its major complication begins between the dichotomy of the simple and complex, the dichotomy of the known and the unknown. Really, if we were to be honest, physically we don't know what's going to happen to the world. And if we were honest internally, not externally, it would be as if the destiny of the mind is how far it activates itself, not per se through a creator state, but through a knowing all state, an all knowing state. You see, pretty much the body, the physical, biological bodies of human beings, we need a system for that. And when it comes to the minds of human beings, the minds are what are generating the definitions and meanings of systems. Really what it is that we are half living in a singular existential dimension and half living multidimensionally in an experiential dimension. So I thought that the past, people did their best. In the present, there's so many different human beings working for and towards the advancement of various sectors and civilization. And I thought, in this, from my corner of the universe, how can I extend a helping hand for the betterment of the civilization? And this is my conclusion and pretty much the purpose of this episode. That really, I have considered that human beings are going to go through a psychological transitioning state, and really what we call for now in psychology the fragmented psyche, as if the human being is like a combination of shattered moments of itself. To me, I feel that the species requires a conscious entrance into proper multidimensional livelihood. And this can be accessed in regards to how the sense of self is held. So this right now in this talk, it depends on who you are listening to me. If you are someone where physicality has become the primary force of nature, you require to pretty much serve the body of humanity. But if the non-physicality, the mystery of intelligence in this universal sector, the mystery of human intelligence in this universal sector has become of interest to you, you will recognize that pretty much two starting points to, it's like there's two types of causality. A sort of causality where it's starting from known materialism, and a sort of causality that the starting point is unknown immaterialism. When we consider ourselves as minds, really we're doing something very strange for a physical entity. Just the fact that we consider we have minds. You know, it's kind of like, I use this metaphor often in these talks, that the human biology is like, how would I tell you? It's like a candle. And the candle flame and the wax are in a state of confusion. You see, it's as if in front of our eyes we're the wax of the candle. Behind our eyes we are the glow of the flickering flame. To me, really, it feels that if a person does nothing in this lifetime, still nature is using your energy. It has to, in order for you to change. So pretty much human beings are the only species that have an ability to conduct themselves differently than how the environment communicates to them. Now, I have used the term inner realm, outer realm, because I feel Civilization 1.0 missed out on this recognition, and Civilization 2.0 and the children of the future generations require to have this understanding to function. Now, in the inner realms, the permission of the physical image of life, it is malleable. What that means is that a person can comb their hair to the right and suddenly close their eyes and fathom there's a parallel universe where they're combing their hair to the left. Now, again, based on how the beliefs of an individual have kept them in space, or how an unknown awareness finds what is present within it in regards to shape. The entrance of parallel livelihood means that the human being, the individual persona linked to the body, is multiplying or being remembered as multidimensional. There is a very great poet by the name of Jalaluddin Maulana Rumi. And the poet Rumi, in his poetry, he talks about truth as if truth is like a mirror that has shattered, and every piece of that mirror is reflecting the truth of what's in front of it. And it's another way of saying where the soul is like the broken reflections of God, or of some sort of universal, unknown truth, inconceivable truth. What I'm trying to say is we are born and imbued with the ability of multidimensional perception. Before a person makes any decision, behind their eyes they're witnessing various pathways. For me, it's like my imagination used to be in language, but now it has pretty much moved and transitioned towards being image oriented. What that means is that for me, my imagination is like film snippets. That's the best way I could tell you. Just my whole attitude and approach to speech is that it's as if I see a potential living world behind my eyes that hasn't been found here yet. I have, for the future generations of humanity, designed a system where I feel this is the healthiest approach. Even philosophers in the future can use this system to counteract the insanity of the vastness of the unknown, which may cause fear to a temporary, identity. Think of it this way, that imagine there was a human being in a parallel universe, and this human being was so advanced that every version of itself it fathomed behind its eyes, it actualized in front of it. And it would be as if a world, filled with one's own self. Now, for our parallel universe, for speech's sake, I'll say this: we are given the privilege of being established in an internal worldhood and selfhood, but it's as if, like, this is the phenomenal thing about life. If an extraterrestrial landed on Earth, hypothetically in the future, it would look at human beings and be like, okay, all these different human beings are part of the same species. They have similar biological architecture. But if you really look at the human being, our minds are not designed to be the same. It's as if beings didn't have bodies, there would be no world to live in. Just like how in video game consoles you gotta connect the remote controller of the video game to the console, the connection of the remote controller of the console to the console for the human being is equivalent to consciousness linking the future of mind with the body's past. It's as if the body is a sculpture and the mind is the hands of the sculpture. Pretty much I'm trying to say, in one universe everything is you or could be you. In another universe, you have the privilege of being a teammate of a cosmic activity. You know, there was a time where I would say I was haunted by my own emotional desires for a perfection, where behind my eyes it was otherworldly, in front of my eyes I couldn't see it in the world. You know, this planet is really like an instrument that needs to be tuned. You know, and that's another way of saying the solipsis relaxes its own world to realize what other world there was. You know, it's as if the writer that writes on the blank page is not considering that the empty page used to be a tree. Life is so interconnected and interwoven. There is so many events in nature that sometimes I have been able, I think it was like, you know, a blessing of my own intuition, where I have been privileged to see synchronicities before they happen. But what I mean by this is that every moment of life for a conscious being has some sort of intelligence. That intelligence at its core is energetic, and the energy of a human being is how gentle they are with their truth. If a person has a savage, violent truth, then their energy will be in like endless karmic flux. If the person has a sort of gentleness in realizing, like imagine the same gentleness and love and compassion that, you know, a pet owner has to their pet. Imagine you had this similar sort of compassion, but for the whole cosmic event. It's as if when the world is perceived to be alive, that's when the concept of communication transitions beyond individual human personality. I would really say that there's 3 ways to communicate in this world, 3 types of communication. And for the future generations, different human beings will be born and they will be tasked in serving these domains. So one dimension are those human beings who have in some sense been born on this planet to communicate as a self with others. There are some human beings who have been born on this planet not to communicate with others, but in some sense to communicate only with their self. And there are some born who are in some sense, they are here to only be a communication of self and world. So what that means is there are self whisperers, there are, you know, other whispers, and then there is world whisperers. World whisperers are really blessed. I think in yoga this would be equivalent to the Jnani yogi. And it's another way of saying beyond psychological, you know, archetypal destiny. It's as if there's a type of truth seeker that has realized through a sort of humility for the vastness of truth that the unknown is untouchable, therefore desire was hollow. So in reality, life is kind of like a dream, and what happens to a dream, you wake up from it. Now imagine this dream of an individual organism that being only one subject to itself. This transitions. Right now, like what is normal is like we say a person has one body and then the person has one mind, one ego. Right? We don't say like a person has, you know, they like people say like, hey man, that guy's being egotistical. They don't say that, you know, this guy has like 20 egos at once. You know, it's as if like what I'm trying to say is that beyond the boundary of an individual self, an unknown collective life remains. Human beings right now have, I think for a majority of human beings, they have an inability, an incapability to not touch the unknown when they experience it. Due to this, it's another way of saying that their initial self will create intermediaries because it feels unworthy of truth. You know, there was this very enlightened guy by the name of Papaji. Papaji says there are some human beings who never wonder about the transcendental because at some point in their life they were rejected by it. It's as if the collective life of the species, it's like for those who deserve. Even me giving these talks right now, based on what's going to happen to me in the future and who's going to listen to these talks in the future, the worthiness of a causal inference, how would I say it? It's as if like my life force is piloting a certain direction and either the plane arrives at the destination or the pilot ejects from the airplane. Now imagine being a system where there's multiple pilots. Imagine that Earth and the domains of the mind of the species, that means the aggregate of all minds. That means there's, let's say, the activity of an outer civilization, outer human civilization, which is what's physically happening on the surface of the planet. Then there is the inner activity of the civilization. That inner activity is another way of saying that to be human is kind of like holding your attention in a certain way. Upon the recognition that attention to itself is non-local, then the world is freed. You see, it's like there's 3 types of enlightenment that needs to happen actually. One enlightenment is freedom of self from self. So this means like however way you have been a person in this lifetime, at some point you pause this video game and for a moment you look at it and you realize that your expectation on any sort of self is actually how your memory has recorded the realm and how the free will has an ability to project probabilities to the realm. So once you realize yourself in some sense doesn't exist separate to everything else, there's a sort of liberation of self from self. Then the next thing that people need to get liberated from is self and others, and this is way more difficult. That means a person can renounce something when they're alone easily, but when they are in public, the renunciation takes another sort of life. It's as if there's a value to performing in front of yourself, and then there's a value of performing in front of the species. Some people tell me, why am I giving so many talks? I'll be like, it's only one lifetime I can speak to my species. It's like I'm the first person in my ancestry to start like a podcast with this many episodes in it. So let me change the song I'm listening to in the background. Okay. Once you are free from your own mind, once you are free from the minds of others, you reach a point where the only thing left to be free from is the mind of the world. And this is the worthiness of a universal being. This is something that I have managed to tap into it, I would say, through silliness and preferencelessness. Somehow it's as if like I was an honest fool and I walked into an angle of looking at life where, it's like the limitations of language became irrelevant. I will tell you that there's been moments in this life where I have given up on myself. And usually what happens is you realize that there's always a previous self of reversion. So it's another way of saying that it's like once one sense of self gets defeated, the person reverts back to their previous senses of self that had succeeded. But eventually, if you reverse engineer far enough and try to figure out where your first memory is in the content of your mind, the person just realizes a lot of this universal system, this world of ours, multiversal even, you can fathom it, is automated. You know, free will is a very small range of how vast, how intensely the cosmos is happening. And it is an incredible ability to be able to fathom parallel dimensions to life. Really, like, you know, problem solving is this. You know, even Albert Einstein says something where he says no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it, as if anything that wants to advance a new angle is required. Now, if we want to advance beyond the individual egoic self, the new angle will either be as if we have, like, we go into an era where there's one mind but multiple bodies. Like, think of it this way. We're in an era where there's one mind, one body. This is normal. Right now, imagine we go to an era where there's still one mind but multiple bodies, and then we reach a point where there is multiple minds, and let's say in one body, and then eventually get to a point where there's multiple minds and multiple bodies, and that would be a phase in human civilization where body hopping will happen. What that means is, imagine like you had 100 people and you connected all their brains to this one server of information. Okay, whether natural or technological. And then, let's say technological, and all these brains of like these 100 people were connected to this one computer, and it didn't matter anymore which sense of self was in which body, when all senses of self had an access to instantly move into other bodies. That means really I have wondered, why does the concept of love exist? And I realized because the eternal can do nothing else. People don't realize the evolution of power is into the decency of being able to walk not just in your own world, not just in the world you're in, but with the world of worlds. That's it. You know, some people in let's say traditional spirituality, they believed in this idea of guardian angels. And imagine they ask this one person, they're like, hey man, what's your guardian angel? And the person's like, oh, my guardian angel is the whole cosmos. Do you know? It's like the guiding divine will is everything being everything before something could only be a part of everything. So really, multidimensionality, parallel-livelihood, you know, an advanced civilization, these are things that there's no reason actually to fear them. You know, it's like the moment a human being realizes the human part is defined by knowledge, but the being part is related to an unknown experiential witness. You know, sometimes I think about why isn't the most advanced state of mind present for all human beings? And I realize it's because we shape ourselves before we can discover the momentum that brings shapes into being. You know, it's as if like a person can believe in God, but they have to be honest. And when they're honest, they realize that there's this view of an inconceivable God, and then there's this view of a conceivable God. And at the same time, their brain is generating the starting receiving point of any sort of reality. That means it's as if, like, you know, imagine, you know, the prophets were sharing holy books and nobody on the planet knew how to read. You know, it's as if they're required to be a receiving ability, and then the realm is gifted with additional dimension. really thought about what's going to happen in the future, and multiple mindhood and multiple bodyhood, it's going to become as normal as how right now we are under the impression we have one mind and one body. Right? People fear the new, not realizing it's the destiny of the old. Now, let's go back to this notion of parallel selfhood. And how I was saying that, let's say you comb your hair right, that's parallel, Earth 1. And then you comb your hair left, like that's parallel, Earth 2. Okay? And these two events are happening simultaneously. Now, instead of combing your hair, I want you to imagine that in one parallel universe, this sense of self that you are now has achieved the ultimate victory. And then fathom, in another parallel universe, your sense of self has achieved the ultimate defeat. Both are achievements, but achievements with different return. Now imagine an interdimensional relationship happening between two senses of self in two parallel universes. So imagine excuse me. I'll say it again. Imagine we have person A, and person A in parallel, let's say in Earth 1, in parallel Earth 1, like they are victorious, and in parallel Earth 2, they are defeated. Now imagine these two parallel universes can contact one another, and from the parallel universe of the victorious self decides to lend a helping hand to the other dimensions. So, this is something we don't think about because we call it parallel universes, but they're actually interdimensionality is the suggestion of perpendicular universes. Now, let's say in parallel universe Earth 2, person A is about to experience the greatest defeat. And in parallel universe Earth 1, person A, their most victorious self, has already achieved victory. It would be as if the victorious self would consider its victory so grand that it would go to every other perpendicular and parallel dimension and encourage its victory. You see, it's the strength of a self that is internally multidimensional and a self where externally it is multidimensional. Our external, let's say our outer realm multidimensional self is how we're being part of a species. But when it comes to our inner realm multidimensionality, it's as if behind your eyes you are the self, you are others, and you are the world. In front of your eyes you are the self, you are not others, and you're not the world. And eventually could even come to the realization you're not this self. Like that's the whole yogic wake up from the simulation of samsara, a situation. Pretty much I'm just fathoming that. Here, I'll polish the example a bit. Let's say there was 7 parallel universes, okay? And 3 out of these 7 parallel universes, the sense of self, let's say the soul had fragmented and divided into these 7 universes, and in 3 of the universes there was victorious souls. So what that means is, imagine in 3 parallel universes you have achieved great victory, but in 4 other parallel universes you have been defeated. That means it's as if you've had three liberated lifetimes in this example, and then 4 defeated lifetimes. So the liberated, all that they can do is, after they have liberated themselves, they liberate others, and after they have liberated others, they liberate the world. And that's really when you mahasamadhi out of this realm, and you reach a point where it's as if, right now I'm giving this podcast to human beings, to like, my outer realm species, but beyond this lifetime, for now it's more like an intuitive sense that I won't be in a humanized form, and I will be speaking to galaxies and planets. Because the nature of communication is to just find the edge of infinity, and infinity can only become an edge of truth only when you accept it. So that means, upon the acceptance of infinity, all desires dissolve. It's like the ego realizes it can have infinite desires, and it's like, what's the point? I thought I was special, in this world, but it's an infinite changing cosmos. Infinity is, it can break even the ego. So pretty much that's the idea when the victorious future reminded the defeated past. It's another way of saying that greater dimensions will prevail, and the task of the lesser dimensions is to consider themselves the greatest in order to plant the greatest seeds, right? So imagine there was a gardener, and this gardener sacrificed its life, let's say his life, to plant seeds, right? And people were like, hey man, why are you planting trees? Why aren't you climbing them instead? And the person's like, because the joy of one man is nothing compared to the joy of a universal sector. People don't realize the moment the species walks towards an advanced civilization, the most greatest supernatural blessings will, in some sense, fly towards where Earth is. I am telling you, when the species awakens to its collective nature, an era of human life will happen where everybody alive now will, in some sense, be ashamed that they missed it, but in some sense, it's as if, like, it's like the author doesn't need to read his own book. I have had a metaphysical relationship, and people are going to be like, Mr. Within, you sound like you have a time traveler's ego, and I'll be like, it's okay. I've accepted the context I speak in, but really, I have had moments where I have felt I have been contacted by a future self, where in the future it is disembodied and it's a field of activity. It's as if right now, in the past, we were individual objects. In the future, we're going to be collective space that has surpassed even subjective nature. So right now, it's like matter is in the drive, is holding the steering wheel of attention, but beyond the body's framework of, obviously there's going to either be a different frame or there's going to be space. It's as if memory is compartmentalized, but the moment the attention is liberated beyond biological boundary. This doesn't mean death is freedom. It just means that at some point, all the known systems that are sensory based, which we have trusted the meaning of life to and believe in, it's at some point going to dissolve and shake. It's as if karma is for an individual. The moment you're not an individual, karma doesn't apply. Instantly, it's like before you could escape the simulation, the world changed. Now, somebody can say, somebody can challenge me and be like, all right, Mr.Within, you tell me this, that in a world where, let's say, there's infinity, and there's, let's say, like, how do immortal beings get enlightened, not mortal beings? I would tell you that if an immortal being is listening to this, or in the future, let's say immortal beings will listen to this episode, this is my recommendation from 2022. Pretty much as an immortal being, you're going to discover the nature of energy being endless. The moment you experience endless energy, you discover a state of reality where the unconditional is more certain than the conditional. It's another way of saying that it's like you experience the level of the body, and then you level up. You experience the immortality of mind, whether it's in a body or whether it's just a sight. And beyond the sight, it's as if we start off where our eyes are looking at, and eventually this attention returns back. It's as if, like, believe it or not, the secret to the world that human beings had a huge issue of fathoming was really actually the entrance into the true nature of reality is from within. And what from within means is that it's a secret of how attention is being. One's future self is as much of a stranger as one's past self to the future self. We think that children need to be educated, they need to be taught knowledge. But in reality, the being that becomes content with the unknown, it's as if it doesn't matter where in the cosmos, in what civilization, in what format your attention has awakened. I don't know how to say what I'm envisioning now, but I guess a way of saying it would be, it's pretty much like individual beings remembering their collective beings, a collective being such a collective being that it in some sense gets bored of eternity and becomes individual. It's honestly a cycle. I have wondered about the victory of potential parallel selves of mine. There was a week, I think this was in 2017 or something, where I remember there was a week where I got a vision that there was a parallel self of mine, kind of entrapped in space in some sort of, you know, let's say some sort of station, right? And there was even moments where I felt like I had to stop doing things in this parallel universe which I'm in, so other parallel universes could have more of an energetic ability. It's going to be a remarkable time. Human beings are going to awaken to their multidimensional life. And the probabilities of the inner realms can be actualized. You know, in my youth, I remember I had a fear. And if people were, like, if I was to tell you a fear of what, I would say a fear of the fear doesn't exist in the same way now, but I have this memory of having a feeling when I was young that it's as if it's the feeling of being in a world where you feel a stranger to the world as much as the world is a stranger to you. And I remember that what calmed down my psychology was just going to the ultimate value. You know, sometimes I think about in how many different ways I could have lived, in how many different moments I could have existed in. And then I think about even if I was an immortal being, like that would be endless. That means that an immortal being would get bored of life only to realize there's a reason it's temporary. It's like, imagine you want to go see this, office that's, at the top of this building, and you go into the lobby and you just stay in the lobby, right? But you're actually expected to be in the office at the top of the building. So it's one of those situations where it's like you being on Earth is being stuck in the lobby, right? And if the human being doesn't have this feeling, and what intuition is that continue your path, you are expected, not somewhere, you are expected beyond location. Really, the concept of loneliness doesn't exist for energy. People don't look at the periodic table even and be like, yo, look at these elements, they're so lonely, they can't talk to each other. Aside from chemical reactions, I'm just trying to tell you, the more we define reality based on physical existence, the less there is a need to actually use our mind. And people don't ever talk about this, but the danger of logic is that it denies novelty entrance sometimes. And logic, of course, I have a view on it similar to Wittgenstein, where he was like, the concept of logic is transcendental because it's a subjective, accurate representation of the outer events. What that means, it's like the world is existing in a way we don't know, but this world is existing in a way we don't know. It's also existing in that same way in our inner realms, in a subjective way where, I think probably due to conditioning and the limitations of the brain, we can't access. It's like I'm trying to tell you that there's a world in front of your eyes, and it has a certain logic, this outer realm, and then behind your eyes, the logic of the outer realm has to be subjectified, so it means it subjectively already exists but hasn't been found. It's as if truth is sitting, it's as if the throne of truth is the collective unconscious. There's a story that there's this monk, this sage, and he goes in the forest and he starts meditating, and he would go to the market sometimes or whatnot, and then people would suddenly see this person's presence, and the sort of equanimity and inner peace that this person had who would just go in the forest and meditate. And eventually this man has so many people coming to the forest and meditating with him that he automatically becomes like a guru, and then everybody is like his disciple, right? Now, one day they realize, like one winter, they realize it's going to be a rough winter. So the monk tells, like, let's say all the disciples that, all right, guys, we're going to go into the king's palace. Now, before this, I forgot to mention something. This monk, this guru, had a very unique disciple. Out of all the disciples, there was a weird disciple, and this weird disciple was always happy, was always just smiling. Right, to the point that they called this guy the smiling disciple. Like, nobody knew how this guy could be smiling all the time, like a natural, sincere smile, right? So just keep in mind that there's a character in the story called the smiling disciple. Now, the guru looks at all the disciples and says, all right, we got to go to the king's palace, like we're going to freeze to death or something. And so they go to the palace, and when they go to the palace, the king meets this monk that, like, the whole town and everywhere has been, you know, they've realized who he is. Like, his inner peace is echoed, you know, globally. And so the king comes to visit the sage and all the disciples, and the king says that, you know, I have problems with the council, and I have, like, you know, all my wives and whatnot, you know, who are trying to, like, forward their princes, you know. You know, the king's like, I got problems, man, I can't come and talk to you now, I'll come and talk to you later. So pretty much the whole winter passes, and the sage and the disciples are ready to leave, and the king hasn't come. Last minute, the king comes before the sage leaves. And at this point in the story, the sage has become an old man. Not in just one winter, but just imagine. Okay. So the sage is about to leave. The king is like, yo, old sage, don't leave. You know, and the king gives this, you know, asks this old sage to become his, like, you know, wise counselor. And then he tells the sage to send the disciples into the forest where they can, you know, expand their inner peace and whatnot. And bear with me, guys, I'm gonna get through this story. The old sage, the guru, decides to stay with the king. He looks at the smiling disciple and he says, take everybody to the forest and keep basking in the truth of nature, and how, because it is so supreme, it has already achieved peace and whatnot, right? And so the smiling disciple keeps smiling, and they all go to the forest, and the guru stays with the king and becomes the king's counselor. Many years go by, and so, like, so many people gather in the forest, and one day the smiling sage the smiling disciple decides to come and visit his old, like, teacher, you know, and whatnot, you know, the first guru. The scene takes place where the guru is in the palace drinking a cup of tea, and in front of him the smiling disciple is there, and the guru has become an old man, and the smiling disciple sees this, and anything the guru says, the smiling disciple just looks at the old man and says, oh, what happiness, like, sincerely. He's just super cheerful. He says, oh, what happiness, what happiness. You know, and so in that exact moment, the king enters the room, and the old guru starts to get up to respect the king, and the king just tells the old guru to sit down, you know, as if don't worry about it, right? But the king suddenly looks at the smiling disciple, and the smiling disciple doesn't react. Like a king has entered the room, and the smiling disciple is just there drinking tea with his guru, just saying, oh, what happiness, what happiness. And the king looks at this and suddenly gets angry, like the kingly ego falls upon him, and he says to the sage, he says that this disciple of yours You're this smiling disciple of yours, he has been so lazy doing nothing in the forest that it's as if he's gone crazy and he's just saying, oh, what happiness and what happiness. The king is getting angry at the smiling disciple. And before the king finishes saying this, the old guru just stops the king and tells the king that, wait, there is something you don't know about the smiling disciple. And the smiling disciple is just smiling and drinking tea. And this is pretty much the main point of the story, where the guru looks at the king and says, this smiling disciple used to be a man where everybody in the land respected, used to be a man who was escorted by armored guards, used to be a man who used to be the greatest conqueror of the realm. And suddenly the king realizes the smiling disciple used to be a king too. But then the guru explains to the king that this guy used to be a king, used to be at the peak, the peak of the summit of the ego's power, right? But he renounced it all, went into nature, and now he has found true happiness, a happiness where the kings envy. That is the power of mysticism, ladies and gentlemen. That's the power of true happiness. Beliefs can't touch it. Right now, because language is dualistic, pretty much the world is in a battle of negative perceptions and positive perceptions. That means it's as if good people want truth to be, positive order, and bad people want truth to be chaos. To be negative chaos. But if truth is beyond duality, it's as if neither a bad man can go to hell and neither a good man can go to heaven. Because the original state's been there from the beginning. It's this hilarious thing where the body, let's say from the Abrahamic, from a theological lens, the body was exiled from the kingdom of heaven, but the mind is still there. And really, different parallel selves can't live each other's lives. Imagine there was a polite time traveler. This polite time traveler came to his past self and was like, hey man, you don't have to do this, but if you do this and this and this, my future will be different. And imagine the person's like, oh my god, my future self is so polite, alright, sure, I'll do it, Then it becomes like a willing choice. And this is on a tangent, but I remember kind of the idea of magic being a very early concept in my mind. But I will tell you, the greatest magic is honesty, the greatest power. It is something that after all trials and tribulations, karmic or otherwise, it's as if when the being can not hate the self but love the self, when the being can not hate the species but love the species, and when this being cannot hate the world but love the world, in that state the most supreme freedom is activated before any sort of novel creation. It's as if free yourself before it's like free the context of meaning before you need to free the concept through a specific storyline. So guys, I'm going to take a couple minutes to just honestly just relax and take a breath. If people have questions in the chat section, feel free to ask them. But I'm going to be quiet for a couple minutes, and then I'll continue the episode. So I've pretty much, let's say during this intermission, I wrote some sentences. I'm just gonna read and explain these and then I'll end life. First note, if the future self is a collective being, the past can never be defeated. This means that if our future self is like one collective intelligence, there is no individual past that could be defeated. No individual self could lose when the whole thing is victorious. It's another way of saying that. The second statement I've written here is, if the future self is an inconceivable being, the inconceivable past cannot be defeated because it doesn't exist. So it's as if the future is beyond conception, how we are being a conception cannot be a defeat. The next thing I've written is, if the future self is void, then defeat has no content of reference to matter. I'll say this, if the future self is one being, which is another way of saying collective being, it's as if, again, it's as if there's nothing to be defeated and nothing to be victorious. It's all the same. The other sentence I've written here is, the possibility of a multidimensional life is a spark of an eternal fire. What I mean by that is that just for the human being to fathom what their multidimensional life could be like, it's sparking, I would say, an eternal being's remembrance. It's as if it's like a temporary defeat is nothing when there's an eternal victory, or eternity is victorious, which is another way of saying truth has never gone anywhere. That's the ultimate victory. That's the ultimate psychological contentment. The presence of truth is instantaneous. And the last thing I've written here is a theological note. If God knows what man cannot be judged for what he cannot know. Perhaps destiny never made a mistake. The cosmos is its own show. The future is going to be multidimensional. We are already multidimensional, but in the outer realms, we have limited ourselves to a specific character in a story. I personally have observed this from, let's say those in the profession of acting. When I look at actors, and there's something called method acting. In method acting, the person acts as something to such a degree where they forget who they were. It's another way of saying diving into the experience of a character that replaces your own. Really, how the mind is the mind has an ability to shift its room of perspective. And people don't know this, but the greatest intelligence system to get answers is actually one's own mind. Your mind is the teacher after all the outer teachers have taught you their lesson. When you find the guru within, this does not mean a relationship with an image or a persona in the void. It's another way of saying the roars of causality can be heard regardless of the effect. Regardless of how the world has happened, its essence remains. True advancement means nothing can be an obstacle. Sometimes I've thought about what is the most advanced way an advanced civilization can come about. And the answer is only if it's instantaneous. That means behind our eyes. No limits in front of it, we choose. The limitless chooses its limits. And so regardless of What sense of self has defeated? Remember the victories of the future. And try to fathom how your potential greatest self in another dimension would greet you, you know? That means imagine, rather than a person going to heaven, hell, or being on earth, it was as if there was a sense of self in hell, a sense of self on earth, and a sense of self in heaven. And unless these three senses of self could realize that they were lines of the same shape, dear listeners, the unknown is the real speaker. Remember the mystery of how there is life force in the cosmos and there's nothing can bother you. We don't want to just have an image or a poster of an advanced civilization. Really what it is that we want to experience the most advanced relationship of self to self, the most advanced relationship of others to self and self with others, and then ultimately the most advanced relationship of self with the world, others with the world, and all the combinations of that relationship. And let's say, you're someone who's, let's say, on the planet, maybe there's a, fictional possibility for this, that there's a human being on this planet who they feel they have experienced like their future self. The idea is that nature knows what the personality bound in time cannot. So really it's another way of saying that if the future self has an ability to come to the past, it also has an ability to shift its existence of the future. That means really all time travelers have to do is just come back to the past and go back. And the moment they do this, there has been some sort of input into the system, into let's say a past parallel world. It's honestly really fascinating to wonder that beyond one's name, like what is looking through the eyes of all of us? Does it have a singular source? Is it empty? Is it just bound to duality, or is it infinite, or is it all the various combinations of these? To the point where in one talk I created the concept of a hollow infinity. But anyways, the glow of the candle will one day go out, and so that its light has to be used. Every human being should in some sense try to find the most advanced world, and they'll automatically experience an advanced self. When a person becomes honest, they give themselves a permission to discover their true value in relationship to, let's say, the intelligence of the world. I remember hearing Terence McKenna talk about the Gaian mind and how, native tribes back in the day, they were in some sense, they had a sort of reverence and divine relationship with nature, where it was as if a sort of dialogue of intuition and synchronized action in nature. Right now, the species hasn't found the balance between nature and technology, but the future generations are going to be so smart, they're going to figure it out. I feel capitalism is a good system, but it's a system that would be great a couple hundred years from now. And let me tell you why. You see, whenever there's competition, the psychology of someone competing with another is to not care for another dimension. And this, when you look at global society, has reached a point where people are producing low quality products. This is actually bizarre to me. It's as if you're alive once, and just for the sake of, let's say, monetary profit, the person sacrifices the quality of something, right? I feel that everything should be the highest quality. Like, what would the most advanced humanity deserve? It would deserve instantaneous freedom and instantaneous ability. The personality that becomes aware of the presence is it's like a personality trying to know the unknown. But when a person remembers their presence, which is more like a nature of being, it's a state. You see, me right now, I'm speaking words, but the state I'm in has nothing to do with the words. A state of being is another way of saying how sensory information is held in one moment. And if you hold this world as if you are the source of all visible, perceivable freedom in your eyes, it's as if it's like trying to see if, regardless of all the chaos, there is an ultimate order to reality. But the ultimate order is beyond the dance of chaos and order. So it's this strange situation where human beings just need to see beyond this room, and then they'll have a contentment of how they animate in it. There's going to be children in cyberspace who are going to live cyber lives while simultaneously living natural biological lives. We are in the pioneering phase of that in 2022, but in the future this is going to be really advanced. It used to be survival of the fittest. Now it's survival of the greatest awareness. Survival of the furthest sight. That's what's happening now. And so, in honor of the victory of the future, regardless of any sort of defeat of the past, none of it matters in the presence of a victory. I will tell you, I've had moments in life where I didn't know how to evaluate a sort of ability, and then after a while, you suddenly realize there's something there, But really, it's like nature. It's like what is second nature is how nature is happening. So when a person trusts their self, trusts others, and trusts the world, they have actually freed themselves from any sort of boundary. In a world where there's gods and men, and there's, all the fictional, sci-fi character archetypes. To me, it's as if, we have to bow to Mother Earth, and in some sense, march for Father Sky. It's another way of saying that you don't free your mind, you release your mind. And when I say you release your mind, based on your trust of life, it happens. That's really what ability is. It's just a proper energetic release. where its position, its outcome was coordinated before you even released the energy. I mean, honestly, when I'm wondering how am I even talking right now, like, in regards to the inner realms, it's literally like I'm existing, and there's like an invisible room overlaid on the whole moment where my senses are seeing this physical world. And in that room, it's as if like, how can I tell you, it's like sometimes it's on a screen, sometimes it's like the 3D experience of the perception. You know, there's this thing they say that people remember journeys. Why? Because they were experientially engaged with it. Anything that relates to your direct experience becomes like, you know, part of your knowledge. Easily remembered, instantaneously remembered. I will tell the listeners something hilarious. There's been times I've listened to these talks of mine, and you know, and there's been a moment where I've coughed, and in the talk exactly I've coughed in the same way. You know, it was like I coughed, you know, like it was like my actual cough was synchronized with the way I had coughed in one of these talks. You know, like the same timing, right? And honestly, it's just we are tunneling through perception only to realize where the energy for the tunneling comes from is the source of reality. You know, it's like, I would say, you don't discover the soul, you remember it after you have befriended your own nature. You know, it's as if it's as if a multidimensional being forgot it was multidimensional, so it goes on in a singular dimension, acting, you know, based on chaos and order, only to remember that it's our birthright. You know, it's the birthright of an existential being that experiences things consciously. Our minds are the extension of the world that we cannot see in the outer realms, but behind our eyes it's ever expanding. It's as if like there's it's like in the outer realms we can't find the edge of the sky, but in the inner realms it's like right behind our eyes. But it's another way of saying like infinity is connected to everything. That means if you have like 0 plus infinity, it equals infinity. If you have 1 plus infinity, it equals infinity. If you have 2 plus infinity, equals infinity. If you have infinity plus infinity, equals infinity. And really, that's what's the periodic table is doing. It's as if the periodic table has understood infinity, but everything else that is composed based on these basic elements, it has not. Right, so it's kind of like what comes with the program of being incarnate in a realm as a temporary being. It's as if you cannot avoid the purpose of life having an existential outcome, and at the same time realizing the only way the existential outcome has a meaning is because of an experiential event happening. You know, it's like after you have honored the life in your eyes, and you've honored the life in the eyes of others, then you honor the eyes of the sky pretty much. It's another way of saying that a universal being no longer needs to worship itself. It's free. That means imagine there was a religious story where in the Abrahamic tradition, and so Adam and Eve, like from a theological lens again, like they take the apple, and instead of God being like, I told you not to do this, why are you doing this, like get out of here, instead of God having that approach, God in some sense being like, it was my fault that I did not create you better. You know, rather than the punishment going on the creation, the outcome of the creation is the responsibility of the creator. And so I would say it's another way of saying that it's as if God's conscience was the origin of man. And it's another way of saying, like, the perfect creator created the perfect creation but wasn't sure. And so an imperfect scenario was imposed. But the moment we in the outer realms build paradise on earth, which is an advanced civilization, and in the inner realms you find paradise on earth by discovering your nature and not fearing if it goes beyond humanized archetypes or dehumanized archetypes. That's the true courage of how to be a multidimensional being. You can't fear your mind, you just honestly discover where the unknown variables start and where the known variables are, and then you instantly have contentment if you can clearly perceive. You know, Jedis had lightsabers and human beings have concentration. Really, it's an energetic choice too. I mean, right now I could choose to see myself as victorious. It's like, yeah, I'm victorious, you know. I could choose to see myself as defeated. It's like, oh no, I'm defeated, right? But all of it is an energetic positioning. It's as if my body is standing in the world and my attention is standing as my body and my world. It's like when the past cannot believe in its defeat, you know, or believes in the victory of the future before its own defeat. It's as if that's an advanced being. It's like an advanced being doesn't have hope because it's too busy doing it. It's as if the experiential route, it's pretty much like we're evolving beyond subjects, and that's the multidimensional phase. And beyond multidimensionality, there's the choice to be or not to be. It's as if Shakespeare was, strangely, I would say 3,600 years maybe ahead of his time. Way more than that. And who knows why 8 billion creatures are like on a rock hovering in the middle of nowhere, and we named everything. And there's laws in nature, but we also have minds that create their own laws in accordance to the laws of nature. Like, all of this is, to me, like it's like at the level of a dream. It's like the bizarreness of the mystery life is equivalent to the bizarreness of like that moment when you are having a dream and you're like, am I in a dream world right now? What is this? You know? Imagine somebody has like this important presentation to give in the morning, and they go to sleep, and then in their dream it starts like becoming like a nightmare, and the person's like, I don't have time for this, get out of here, nightmare, you know, I need some rest. And suddenly the nightmare stops in the dream. It's as if study the mind that only you have access to, and you will be surprised. Like I'm telling you, anybody who wonders about how their own intelligence happens, regardless of any other like outer opinion, I'm telling you, when you learn from the nature, how the mind is being awareness, you instantly know things that have nothing to do with any condition. I am telling you, there are some dehumanized states that are not archetypally bound, and there's some dehumanized states that are archetypally bound. That means an alien is a dehumanized state which is archetypally bound. or let's say a robot is a dehumanized state, which is archetypally bound, but a space of being is not archetypally bound. That means there is a freedom that shapes seek in a changing world, and there is a shapeless freedom before change can be witnessed. Let us trust life so we experience the grand happening. There's so many ways intelligence can move, but when intelligence orchestrates, when 8 billion human beings, as if each unique DNA is like a unique instrument, and advanced civilization is when the greatest symphony is being heard. It's as if the species tries its best before it goes extinct, and that's what, the attitude of an advanced civilization. Because what else is there? Everything else that's conditional and experience becomes boring. It's as if like an infinite future seems way more exciting than a snapshot photo of a belief of the past. It's like the wonders of dynamic experience surpass any sort of ideological container. Attention is free before the good not to be. Thanks for listening. Blessings.